All right, let's just jump right in, shall we? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating piece of theological commentary by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We're looking at a deeply pivotal text, the Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapter 7, verse 15. And what we're going to explore today is how this ancient text tackles a really profound psychological and spiritual paradox, the paradox of surrender.
Now, right out of the gate, the text hits us with this huge intellectual mystery. Think about it. If surrendering to God brings ultimate liberation from all our material struggles, why don't highly educated, incredibly successful leaders just, well, do it? If it's supposedly this simple path, why do brilliant, hardworking minds actively avoid it? It's a question that really challenges our everyday assumptions about what it actually means to be intelligent and successful. So, how does the commentary tackle this? Well, it sets up a really interesting contrast. Historically, the text points out that many great thinkers and leaders, figures it considers genuinely learned, did in fact surrender. But on the flip side, we have what the text calls atheistic plan makers. These are individuals who manufacture their own worldly plans, acting like grand planning commissions. And according to the commentary, because the material energy of nature is just so incredibly powerful, these unauthorized worldly plans are ultimately completely baffled and crushed by it.
To label these folks, the text uses this specific Sanskrit umbrella term, duṣkṛtino, which roughly translates to miscreants. And this is an absolutely crucial point. The text is definitely not saying these people are stupid. Actually, it acknowledges they have significant intelligence and perform really meritorious hard work. Any gigantic plan, whether it's good or bad, requires a powerful brain to pull off, right? The issue, according to the author, is that this impressive intellect is improperly utilized. It's essentially misdirected against the supreme plan. To make sense of this, the commentary breaks these miscreants down into a clear, four-part taxonomy. First, the foolish workers. Second, the lowest of mankind. Third, the deluded scholars. Fourth, the open atheists. And finally, we'll wrap up with the core philosophical takeaway.
All right, let's look at Class 1, the foolish workers, or mūḍhāḥ, and the burden of labor.
To really paint a picture of this group, the author uses a super vivid and, kind of harsh metaphor. The beast of burden, specifically the ass. The commentary describes how this animal works tirelessly, day and night, for a master. Yet it's satisfied with practically nothing, just a meager bundle of grass, all while constantly living under the threat of being beaten or kicked. It's a really striking image meant to illustrate people who work blindly for destructive, temporary gains, completely unaware of who or what they're actually serving. Think of being stuck on an endless hamster wheel. The text argues that these individuals will literally suffer through ulcers and indigestion just for temporary gains, satisfied with practically no real nourishment. And when you ask them about eternal truths or immortality, their standard reply is that they have no time. They are just completely absorbed in serving these illusory material masters, enjoying only a tiny fraction of the fruits of their immense labor. Why does this matter for us? Well, it absolutely challenges us to take a hard look at modern hustle culture and ask ourselves, what are we actually working so hard for? Moving right along to Class 2, the lowest of mankind, narādhamāḥ, and this idea of lost consciousness.
Here's where the text drops a very specific cosmological number. Out of a staggering 8.4 million different species of life, it says there are exactly 400,000 human species. The commentary argues that this civilized human form isn't just some random evolutionary accident, it's exclusively meant for one very specific purpose: reviving a lost consciousness of an eternal relationship with the supreme truth.
And that brings us to, honestly, a pretty staggering claim. The author asserts that a massive 99.9% of the current population falls right into this lowest of mankind category. Now, why such a massive number? Well, according to the text, it's because the reformatory religious principles that are meant to revive that divine consciousness are just completely ignored today. A society might be highly developed socially, maybe even politically, but without that core spiritual purpose, the text places them squarely in this category.
To explain why we forget, the commentary shares this really poignant anecdote. It describes how a child, while cramped in the extreme discomfort of the mother's womb, naturally prays to God for deliverance and actually promises to worship him. But the second they're born, influenced by māyā, or illusory energy, the child forgets this promise entirely. The text argues that once this consciousness is lost, these individuals can only be delivered through the mercy of a true spiritual devotee, someone who helps them submissively hear that message all over again.
Okay, that brings us to Class 3, the deluded scholars, or māyayāpahṛta-jñānā.
Now this is where the commentary shifts its focus to the highly educated folks. We're talking brilliant philosophers, scientists, renowned poets. The term māyayāpahṛta-jñānā essentially translates to persons whose erudite extensive knowledge has been literally stolen or nullified by the influence of illusory material energy. And this builds perfectly on what we were talking about earlier. The text argues it's absolutely not a lack of brain power. Rather, their academic brilliance has been hijacked by illusion, leading them entirely away from surrendering to the Supreme.
The author then sets up this fascinating comparison. On one hand, you have the plain, simple statements of the Gita. The author points out that the Gita plainly states Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Pretty straightforward, right? Yet, on the other hand, the text argues that these deluded scholars deride him, intellectually minimizing him as merely a historical human being through what the author calls unauthorized interpretations. The author views these highly academic but unauthorized interpretations as massive stumbling blocks on the path to any real spiritual understanding.
And finally, we have Class 4, the open atheists, known as āsuram, bhāvam, āśritāḥ.
Now, this group takes a way more direct, confrontational stance. The term itself refers to those who accept demonic principles and possess an openly atheistic nature. According to the commentary, the foundational characteristic of this group isn't just ignorance, it's a deep-seated envy toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they aren't just ignoring the divine, they are actively and philosophically opposing it.
So how does this open atheist class actually operate? Well, the commentary lists a few specific ways. First, they argue vehemently that the Supreme Lord can never descend to the material world, though the author notes they consistently fail to provide any tangible reasons as to why not. They also try to subordinate the Lord to impersonal, formless features. Or, and this is probably the most remarkable claim here, the text says they invent illicit incarnations manufactured in the factory of their own brain. They're literally using their intellect to try and replace the Supreme Lord with their own conceptual constructs.
So, what does this all mean? Let's look at the core philosophical takeaway, the limits of material intelligence.
To really hammer home this overarching thesis, the source brings in this incredibly powerful quote from Sri Yamunacharya. It reads, "O my Lord, you are unknowable to persons involved with atheistic principles, despite your uncommon qualities, and despite your being acknowledged by the famous authorities renowned for their depth of knowledge." The commentary uses this to completely cement its central argument. No amount of purely material intellect, speculation, or earthly science can grasp the divine if it's rooted in atheistic principles or material illusion. It's just a totally different paradigm.
Which, leaves us with a pretty profound question to reflect on as we wrap up. If, as this text so forcefully argues, even the absolute most brilliant, hard-working material intelligence can be completely baffled by illusion, what does that mean for how we pursue ultimate truth? Does our intellect actually need an entirely different kind of compass? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive today, and keep questioning.